Okay, I'll call the meeting to order. Welcome everyone to our October meeting of the Academic Council. I hope all of you and all of yours continue to be well. And also would encourage all of you and all of yours to get a flu shot. It's that time of the year. If you haven't done it already, please get your flu shot. I know everyone is tired and in much need of a break. Hang in there. We're about 1 month away from the last day of classes, so hang in there. Let me also say that our students are exhausted too. The lack of a break booked into the academic schedule is really taking a toll. A good number of our students are experiencing fatigue and mental stress. More so that is at this time of the semester. You know, as we all know, they're living and studying under conditions that are adding to the normal end of the semester stress. So I encourage each of you and all of our faculty to be mindful of this and to reach out to our students when you get a chance. Check in with them outside of class if you can. And I also encourage you to provide whatever relief you deem appropriate to lessen some of these pressures. Our students are really feeling it right now. Our colleagues at Duke Reach and Student Health are available to assist as needed. So please take advantage of these resources if you need those. Since our September meeting, ECAC on the council's behalf approved a resolution to change the name of the graduate school's psychology PhD and Masters of Arts degrees. They changed from psychology to psychology and neuroscience.
Sorry.
The proposal we received came from Academic Programs Committee, and it was approved by APC unanimously. Now, the reason we are doing this, the reason that we did this, is because of an administrative oversight when the departments merged and the names changed back in 2006. Academic Council and the Board of Trustees approved the merger of the two departments, but there was an administrative error, oversight, and we didn't change the names of the graduate degrees. So ECAC approved that name change. And this means now that the degrees reflect the title of a department. And this is what the department intended all along. The approved resolution has been forwarded to the provost, and Sally will take it to the Board of Trustees for its consideration, and I'm sure its approval. So if you see notice of a degree that the trustees are taking some action on a degree, it's not a new degree. It's the same psychology degree. We just changed the name to be consistent and to meet the intent of council's intent back in 2006. Are there any questions? Seeing none, I will continue. I want to make an announcement about the Faculty Scholars Award. The original deadline for this award was back in the spring. When we all abandoned campus in March, and because of the pandemic, the selection process got derailed. The Faculty Scholars Committee has very graciously agreed to accept nominations and to select class of 21 award winners this semester. And I want to thank the committee for their willingness to do this and take this on. And in fact, they're doing double duty this year because we moved the cycle to the fall. So Sally Deutsch in history is the chair of the committee, Doug Boyer from evolutionary anthropology, Danny Liu from pharmacology and cancer biology, Hai Lee, electrical and computer engineering, and Jarvis McInnes from English. Thank you, colleagues, for taking on this task. And let me also say that we have all of the nominations in, and Sandra and Susan informed me yesterday that we have a record number of nominations for the Scholar Awards, 38 nominations. So thank you all for nominating your students. We'll move now to the approval of the September 17th meeting minutes. These minutes were posted with our meeting agenda. Are there any corrections to the minutes? Hearing or seeing none, we'll consider these minutes approved. The next item on the agenda is proposed revisions to Duke's data policy. Larry Karen, the James L. Marion Distinguished Professor in the Department of Electrical Engineering at Pratt School, and Duke's Vice President for Research, is with us today to discuss some suggested revisions to Duke's data policy. Larry provided a document that was posted with the agenda, and he will take some questions following his presentation. We will vote on these proposed changes at our November meeting. As you know, under council rules, we have the presentation in one meeting and we vote the next after council has time to consider the proposal. When Larry takes questions, let me remind you to, as you ask your question, to identify yourself, your department affiliation, because Sandra will transcribe the minutes and we need that information. So thank you for that. Larry.
Okay, so you guys, Carrie, you can see my screen?
Yes.
All right, cool. All right, so I figured the first question you might ask is what's the process that we use to get here? So first of all, this issue started because there's been increasing recognition of the importance and value of data generated in the health system. Particularly, we're talking about human subjects data, exclusively human subjects data. And so there were many decisions that were made somewhat in an ad hoc way over some time. And health system leadership, so Dr. Washington and Dr. Klotman felt that we needed to develop a policy. And so this policy was constituted by an ad hoc group of leaders within largely the health system. I'll show you their names in a moment. We drafted that policy, we showed it to Carrie, and he asked us to bring it to the OLB board, which is our faculty oversight board with regard to IP and translation. We did that on July 20th. They approved it. They made one small edit, but basically they approved it as is. And now we're here today to talk to you. So this is the group of people who drafted this policy. So you can see, well, you can see the names. And so a lot of leaders across the health system, but I was involved as well. And also you can see legal counsel, et cetera. So I'll keep going and we come back to this if you want. Okay, so let me just briefly pull up the policy. I assume that you have had a chance to read it, so I'm not going to read it to you, of course, just to highlight a few points, and then I will take any questions that you have. The key thing, first of all, notice that I'm representing a group, so this is I'm basically the messenger. There have been a lot of other people who have put this together. And Colleen Shannon, who is responsible for protecting data within the health system, she was the chair of this whole process. So the point of all this was what I said before, the recognition that health data, particularly human subjects data, is increasingly important. This is, of course, because of the advance of data science and machine learning. There are two components of this. One is policy on what data we share or license, the procedures by which we do that, the principles by which we do that. And then secondly, if there is money, in other words, if we're paid for this, how will those funds be distributed? So those are the two principles. So again, I assume you've read this, so I'm not going to read it to you. Kind of the most important part with regard to our principles is that we wish, wherever possible, that the data are de-identified. So that means that they cannot be traced back to the identity or the source, the human being responsible for the data. And then if at all possible, this is C, to identify the human subjects, to let them know how their data is being used. And now the second part is the principles of payment. Now this is actually slightly more complicated. and it required a degree of innovation. All right, Carrie, you can hear me good? I mean, I'm good. All right. So the most important principle that I'll just say in plain English, if data are constituted as a consequence of standard of care, in other words, the traditional standard of care within the health system, then any money that is accrued from the sale of that money goes to Duke University, full stop. It does not go to any faculty or clinician, et cetera. And the reason is that this is their job, is to do this work. And so in the context of this policy, we introduced this term that you can see bolded here, which we call data enhancer. And so that is somebody within Duke who is doing something beyond the standard of their job to enhance the data and to place it in a form where it is useful for data science. If one is deemed to be a data enhancer, then that individual will be financially compensated if there is any revenue from this. And so we described, and again, I assume you read it, but we described what that is. But and then with regard to the revenue itself, if there's revenue and if there is a data enhancer involved, after Duke is compensated for costs associated with constituting that data, then all remaining revenue is divided as you see it. So the data enhancer, in other words, the faculty, would get 30% of revenue, and the rest would be split between Duke University and the Duke University Health System. So that's it. I want to emphasize that this policy is exclusively focused on human subject data. So it's not all data at Duke. So let me stop there. If there are any questions, happy to take them.
Are there any questions? Thank you, Larry. Any questions for Larry? So you can use the raise hand function and we'll try to catch questions as they. Okay, seeing none. So Larry, we will again vote on this at our November 19th meeting. If you have questions for Larry in the meantime, please send them to us at the Academic Council office and we'll get those to Larry in advance of the November meeting. And then we'll vote there. Thanks again, Larry. The next item on the agenda is a report on the Title IX, the new Title IX guidelines. And we'll hear from Kim Hewitt, Duke's Vice President for the Office of Institutional Equity, regarding some changes that have been mandated by federal policy. Neera Skirke, Associate General Counsel, is also with us. She worked with Kim and other Duke legal experts to make sure that Duke is in compliance with the new rules. As you may know, on May 6th, the U.S. Department of Education published revised regulations regarding sexual harassment under Title IX of the Educational Amendments of 1972. Pursuant to these regulations, the revisions went into effect on August the 14th of this year. Now, because Academic Council was not in session when the rules were announced and took effect, Kim and Neera met with me and then with ECAC to discuss the implementation of the new guidelines. Now, these changes have impacted our Appendix N in the faculty handbook. So following Kim and Neera's presentation, I will call on our colleague Larry Zelenak from the law school to see if he has any comments associated with these changes. As you know, Larry has been chairing an ad hoc faculty committee that ECAC appointed what seems like 10 years ago to examine Appendix N. And when these new changes came about, we asked this committee to take a look to see if there would be any particular impact on our faculty hearing process. And there are some impacts on that process. But this committee took a look, and we're satisfied that we are okay with that. But Larry is available to answer any questions that may arise. So I'll turn it over now to Kim.
Thank you, Carrie. Good afternoon. As Carrie explained, back in November, the Department of Education published a notice of proposed rulemaking with some pretty significant changes to how universities should respond to Title IX. And then in May, at the beginning of May, the new rules were announced with an implementation deadline of August 14th. And though these final rules impose some sweeping changes on how Title IX matters are handled according to a very specific definition, these complex rules only apply to a subset of all the sexual misconduct matters that we address at Duke. So this graphic kind of shows that there's all this, big pool of conduct that's potentially sexual misconduct, but within this Title IX regulatory definition, it's a very small category of kinds of cases that'll be subjected to this, big regulatory architecture. Oops. And so within this narrow Title IX, as the government has defined it, are cases that are directed against somebody in the United States. So in this narrow context, it does not include anything that might occur outside of the United States within a Duke program or activity. And then according to how they define Title IX sexual harassment, it includes quid pro quo harassment. And then their definition of sexual harassment includes unwelcome conduct that is severe, pervasive, and objectively offensive, such that it would deny a person access to programs and activity, Duke programs and activities. And that's so a much narrower definition of sexual harassment than we would address as part of our regular Duke processes. And then sexual assault, stalking, dating violence, and domestic violence, as those terms are defined in the Violence Against Women Act. So these are in the intersection, and I'm not going to go into this actual knowledge thing because it's not super instructive or helpful, but within this concentric circles is where we find the government's definition of Title IX sexual harassment, for which there applies this kind of rigorous grievance process. So within this narrow scope, the major changes that will apply is, again, only to cases that fall within these specific definitions. Now, these new rules do apply to cases where faculty and staff are accused, thus the changes to Appendix N that Carrie alluded to in the beginning. So historically, we didn't have some of these requirements in the faculty staff context. And then that if you looked at them, probably have read about this, they now require a live hearing with cross-examination and an appeal before anything might get into the faculty hearing committee process. So in terms of how we approached this problem, and Carrie shared some of that, we brought together a working group in May with representatives from the counsel's office, the provost's office, HR, institutional equity, and student affairs. We developed kind of a week-by-week timeline to get through all of this work. We did engage an outside lawyer who's an expert in this. The rules here are nearly 2,000 pages, just like voluminous details to guide us through this process. And we decided that we were gonna, we talked about whether or not we would just think about our policies with respect to this narrow area, and elected to do more of a holistic review of our policies and procedures. We broke down into some subgroups where we really focused on staff and faculty issues, students, and some of these kind of odd procedural or evidentiary rules that are applying in this context. And once we came up with, we developed this umbrella policy with separate procedures, depending upon who the accused person is. And I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail in a few minutes. And we did incorporate several meetings, mostly that took place in July, including the meetings with ECAC and other important constituencies in the Duke community in order to get their feedback as we were developing these rules. And again, kind of keeping in mind that our goal was to apply these rules narrowly in order to be compliant and build on our existing structures that we think were working well, and to try to make some improvements to the broader policy as we were going forward. So the result is an umbrella policy that's called the Policy on Prohibited Discrimination, Harassment, and Related Misconduct. And so that covers all harassment, discrimination, and sexual misconduct at, in the Duke context. And so related to that umbrella policy, there are 3 procedures. And the first set of procedures are Title IX sexual harassment grievance procedures. And these are the procedures that would apply if something falls in this narrow category of the government's defined Title IX sexual harassment. And then there is a separate complaint handling procedures for discrimination and harassment matters involving a student as the accused person, and there's still collaboration and engagement with the Office for Student Conduct there. And then the third set of procedures are complaint handling procedures involving university faculty or non-faculty staff as a respondent. And that's largely the procedures that already existed prior to these new federal regulations, with some, a few adjustments and changes for clarity. So in terms of the Title IX requirement of for live hearings, the live hearings will really operate like little mini trials. And the regulations also indicate that advisors will be assigned to the parties for the purpose of doing cross-examination only. So in our model, we're going to have the hearings be presided over by an independent hearing officer. So we've developed a list of lawyers, some who've worked with Duke before, who have the requisite skills to operate as an independent hearing officers, a separate list of advisors who are also lawyers for this hearing stage. So if someone doesn't have their own lawyer that they want to use in this process, we've developed a list of lawyers that Duke will retain for these purposes. And then the decision maker, though this whole adjudication process will fall within OIE's jurisdiction, for these cases, OIE will only investigate. So we will investigate, not make a decision, not make a determination. The decision maker will be the independent hearing officer. And then a dean or other appropriate leader will provide recommendations for sanctions or discipline to the hearing officer that the hearing officer will include in their outcome letter or their final determination. The parties are also entitled to an appeal of the hearing, which will be presided over by a retired judge or someone who has the skills to review at a lower level the hearing that would have been presided over by an independent hearing officer. The appeal, there are three grounds upon which you can request an appeal. There's new material information, if there was a conflict with one of the investigators or the Title IX coordinator, or a procedural error that impacted the outcome of the hearing. And once that hearing is completed, there is a finding and a determination of remedial actions that should take place to make the complainant whole, the Title IX process concludes at that point. So this would be the end point for all of the Title IX process. And then at that point, any sanctions that aren't remedial to the complainant can be challenged through the faculty hearing committee process, or in the case of a non-faculty staff person, through the dispute resolution process. So Carrie, I don't know, maybe I could pause here if there are questions at this point.
Yes, sir. Any questions at this point? So I'm scanning the raise hand function and
okay. And we can also wait for questions, but just that, I know that was a big chunk to digest. So one of the things we did spend some time as we were doing consulting meetings with various constituent groups, was to think about the concept of reporting or the obligation to report or the notion of responsible employees, which was something that the Department of Education kind of dispensed with respect to the formal Title IX rules, but lots of universities, including Duke, have spent considerable time thinking about how they socialize this notion with the community and educate people about who needs to bring information forward and helping others understand what are our confidential resources and what weren't. So this was one thing we spent a lot of time talking about. How can we make the definitions that we have now more clear, and who should be required to, and we kind of elected this language, required to promptly consult with OIE. And we looked at some peer institutions and how they were handling this, and kind of borrowed this idea of requiring a consultation as a way to sort of thread the needle on the mandatory reporter notion, and really more reflective of what we want is for people to come forward where when they've learned about sexual misconduct or discrimination, to provide details so we can work together to think about what's an appropriate response. And after having these consultations, we talked a lot about whether it should be all faculty or it should be limited in some way. And so we came up with this defined list, and did decide to go forward with indicating that all faculty should bring information forward, and encouraging non-supervisory employees that they are expected to bring information and encouraged to bring information forward and to consult with OIE. And so again, I know we've probably talked before about this issue, really understanding that we want the chance to have a conversation about the information, think about an appropriate response, recognizing that when OIE becomes involved, in most cases, what we will do is send an outreach email to the person who is impacted, inviting them to come and talk to us. Again, that person has the option in most cases to choose not to engage or decide if they want to engage. Of course, in limited circumstances, the university might have to do something without that person's involvement, but really we are more motivated to have people participate in the process and understand what their resources and what support is available to them. And then on, what does this mean specifically with respect to Appendix N? And I'm going to ask Larry and Neera to hop in on this one, but brought it down to these 3 points. This is a narrow carve out just for Title IX sexual harassment matters. And really it does limit there can be no challenge to that final determination of the Title IX process, and any outcome that is specifically connected to remediation of the complainant or making that person whole. Those aspects of the process cannot be challenged in the academic hearing committee process, but any other sanctions that are non-remedial in nature or discipline can still be addressed via the academic hearing committee process. So maybe I'll pause there if Larry or Neera would like to add something.
Yeah, that's a very nice summary of the Appendix N aspects. I'll just say a little more. The committee members who considered this, the ad hoc committee, are Sam Buell, Nan Jokerst, Marin Levy, and Tom Metzloff, and myself. And basically what we were trying to do was preserve as much jurisdiction for the faculty hearing committee as we could, consistent with the regulations, with our understanding being that that appeal rights had to be symmetrical for the complainant and respondent, which meant that if we had allowed a respondent who was found to have committed a Title IX violation to appeal to the faculty hearing committee, we'd also have to allow a complainant to appeal to the faculty hearing committee from a finding of no violation. And we thought that would be pretty inconsistent with the purpose of the faculty hearing committee to permit an appeal like that. So, as very nicely summarized on the slide, we decided the best thing to do, given the limited range of choices we were presented with under the regulations, was to say that there's no appeal to the faculty hearing committee by anybody from a final determination that there's been a Title IX violation or not, as the case may be. But that's as narrow as I think it can be given the regulations, because as Kim explained, it doesn't apply to anything within the jurisdiction of the faculty hearing committee other than Title IX, and there's a lot of other things that are outside of Title IX, and it doesn't apply to sanctions. So anyway, that's what we did, and we thought it was it's not what we would do if the regulations didn't exist, but it was the best choice given the constraints.
Thank you, Larry. Any questions for Larry or Kim at this point? And let me say that there was one concern that Larry, Kim, Nira, the provost, and I sat down to discuss, and I think Kim clarified it. The faculty, we were concerned about this issue of sanctions, because it's possible that a remedial action, the action to make the complainant whole, could also be act as a sanction, right? And how do you separate those? But Larry and I think, in the faculty who were a part of this, were somewhat put at ease when we learned that there would be, that the hearing officer would make no recommendation for sanction or remedial action before consulting with a dean or provost or the provost. So that we didn't want an outsider not understanding the culture of a university to impose some sanction that may not really fit. So we at least have some eyes and ears from the university, so the provost and the deans will be involved when it comes to sanctions from these cases. Kim?
The only, I had one more slide just to kind of talk about what we're thinking about going forward. We have created a set of FAQs that we're going to be posting shortly, because we know this is, it's complex. And we also are going to post the policy again. So we had a short period of public comment at the end of the summer, really kind of got crunched in the time there. And we want to have some time to see how one or two of these cases really operates. And then we're going to revisit it at the beginning of the year, post the policy and the procedures again for public comment so we can get some feedback. I mean, we've already had some real time analysis on what we thought was our first employee case, and it's complex, and even what seems like a simple question is not simple in this context. So we're going to be working also on creating some more really digestible tools to help people understand this process and understand the differences between the narrow Title IX and the broader sexual misconduct. Also just really working to kind of investigate some more alternative resolution processes that we want to, and we can engage in this process as well. So I just wanted to share that also as we kind of think about going forward next steps. Thank you.
Are there any questions for Kim? I've made it where everyone can be, you can unmute yourself, because I'm not sure if I'm catching hands or missing hands. So if there are questions, please.
Could you give a couple of examples of things that are considered remediation type stuff versus sanction type stuff?
And Nira, if you can think of a good example, please feel free to jump in at this point. But, changing an advisor, that might be something that would happen that would make a person whole, but wouldn't be something that the individual person could challenge or would want to challenge. Other kinds of academic accommodations would be another example if it was a student making an accusation against a faculty person. But as Carrie talked about, it could be a difficult distinction if it's, this person is going to be in a different lab, or depending upon how connected their scholarship or their research might be to the accused, we may face some harder questions about how we thread the needle on what's remedial and what's a sanction that can be challenged.
And just to chime in, I'm Nira Skirky from the Office of Counsel. Yeah, I think a good example of something that's remedial is implementing no contact between the respondent and the complainant. And that's something that specifically focuses on the complainant. and making sure that they don't have to interact with this person throughout the rest of their time here. But something that might be a sanction, maybe telling that faculty member that they're not to mentor or to have any trainees in their lab, period, until they complete some required, training, harassment training. And that's something that extends beyond just the complainant. And so I think we would say that that's not a remedial action focused on the complainant, but something broader that then could be challenged.
Thank you. I see Josh Sokolar.
Hi. Yeah. Thanks very much for dealing with these regulations that might constrain Duke to do things in a way that we wouldn't really want to do. But you mentioned at the beginning that having to do this exercise caused you to go back and look at the entire policy, the broader policy. And my question is about Duke's definition of sexual harassment outside the narrow Title IX specifications. I had an exchange with Carrie about this, which quickly devolved into sort of disputes about the semantics of words like adversely affect and significantly affect. And in looking at other universities' definitions of sexual harassment, one sees some nuanced differences that could be meaningful. So my question to you is, where on the spectrum of breadth and narrowness of a definition of sexual harassment do you think Duke lies? Are we being stricter than places like Stanford and MIT? Are we being consistent with their definitions, or are we more, are we interpreting the definition of sexual harassment more broadly?
Oh, yes, so I think ours is actually more generous than the MIT definition. I should know the Stanford definition because I was part of a review committee that looked at their the overall structure of their sexual misconduct this last fall. But we did talk about our, we looked at other institutions, and on the spectrum, I would be hard for me to give a definitive answer on that. I would say ours would probably be more on the generous side than the narrow side, as I'm looking at it. And so I don't know on this. I would probably have to we did go back and do some benchmarking. So I would have to maybe get back to you to say specifically where we compare to the Ivy Plus. I'm not even sure I could do that. But our current, we have a definition of hostile environment harassment, a definition of generalized harassment that is clearly more broad than looser than the Title IX one, allows for a consideration of unwelcome conduct that is severe. So you could have one single severe incident that would fall within the context of our definition. I did look at the MIT one on that question. I think ours is pretty clearly more generous than that particular definition, for easier to meet the standard.
Okay, thank you, Kim. And let me say something about Josh's remark about the exchange that he and I had. He asked the question about the MIT policy of me, and I passed it along to Kim and two other lawyers who came back with, so it wasn't a semantic debate. I just gave you the advice that I received from three lawyers. Nan Jokers.
Hey, thanks, Carrie. This has come before Academic Council, the question of our definition of sexual harassment. Over the last 5 years, this is the third time we've discussed it. And you'll remember Howie at the last Academic Council saying that I think he said that the discussion had gone into limbo. So I'm glad to hear that it's come back. But I think Josh is remembering a discussion from last Academic Council meeting where I'm reading now off of Duke's harassment statement that is on the web. And harassment is when there is conduct that is sufficiently severe, persistent, or pervasive to significantly interfere with an individual's work, education, living conditions, or participation in university programs or activities. And as we had stated at the Academic Council meeting a couple of years ago, Stanford's basically test for harassment is a hostile environment test only. And it does not require the quote unquote severe, persistent, or pervasive nature such that it significantly interferes with a person's work. And so where we left it a couple of years ago is with a request from the Academic Council to review our wording on what constitutes harassment, specifically in light of Stanford's hostile environment. Because it does seem that we are have a much more difficult standard that has to be met compared to Stanford's hostile environment standard. And so this is the discussion that I think, that I know we've had in Academic Council twice in the last 5 years. And I'd like to again ask that we review Stanford's policy and look at our own policy and consider the wording associated with hostile environment. Thank you. Oh, Nan Jokers, electrical engineering, sorry.
So just for clarification, and I will look again at Stanford's definition, but hostile environment, as we understand that term borrowed from the case law, is unwelcome conduct of a sexual nature that, is severe, pervasive, or persistent. So, yeah. So that's the definition of hostile environment, and that sort of reflects our definition. So we do have a hostile environment standard in our policy, which is pretty similar to most other universities. But we can do a comparison specifically to the Stanford language. So just to make it clear, we don't not have a hostile environment standard. That is hostile environment.
And just to chime in, oh, sorry, Dan, can you hear me? I mean, Kim, as you know, is relatively new, and I'm relatively new to Duke. I've been here for a couple years, so I may, have come after some of these discussions. But yeah, just to echo what Kim said real quickly, there's two types of harassment. There's quid pro quo and there's hostile environment. And this language is the legal definition. And certainly we're open to talking about revisiting that, but I think it's very important to understand that, finding someone responsible of harassment is a very serious thing. And so we've tried to track the legal standard in this definition because, something that one person could consider hostile, you kind of get into an academic freedom space there, or First Amendment space, if it's not clearly defined. So we've tried to track that legal definition, but I think we're open to talking about it more.
Yeah, and tracking the legal definition is definitely important, but as a non-legal person, when I read the Stanford harassment statement that's posted for their university and I read ours seems to be a more difficult standard to meet for an individual who may be suffering from sexual harassment. And although the term as a legal definition of hostile environment may reflect our definition, from a community perception standpoint, they do read very differently. Thanks.
Thank you, Nan. Christine Dreher.
Hi, Christine Dre, Evolutionary Anthropology. And my question is, when someone meets the requirements for having displayed inappropriate behavior and sanctions are imposed, how are those sanctions going to be monitored, and who is doing the monitoring, and is there going to be academic memory about these things? Currently, the experience that I've observed is that there's sanctions that have been imposed have not been actually put into effect or monitored.
Kim, can you?
So that's a really good question. So in the process, the leadership person, if they're in this formal process and in the non-Title IX process, will give input on what the sanctions should be that will then be wrapped into the outcome. But from an OIE perspective, this is something we've talked a lot about, how we can create some additional structures to kind of extend that boundary, because I think we've sort of historically thought about our role ending at the point where we make a determination and maybe potentially make some recommendations for sanctions, but we haven't taken the additional step to then follow up and make sure those sanctions or recommendations were imposed. And so we've begun to create a system internally where we track the conclusion of our investigations, and then we do a check-in at 30 days to go back to the leadership and say we're following up on those recommendations, so that we can keep a record of that and then think about whether or not we need to access other resources to try to move those things forward. So that's a really good question.
Manoj.
Hi, Manoj Mohan, Public Policy. I just wanted to follow up on the last question. I think it was a two-part question. The second part was on the institutional memory of these things, because I thought one of the stumbling blocks in implementation long-term of these types of sanctions is you're not allowed to bring up the case references when the same person is accused the next time around, and that becomes really difficult from an OIE perspective. Is that correct, or are we doing something differently about it?
So we do, we maintain a database in our office that, keeps a record of the complaints that come in and the outcome and the determination. And as we start to integrate this additional step, we'll have better metrics or information about what have been the sanctions that imposed and some tracking for whether or not they were implemented in follow-up. So, this is a work in progress, but that's what our objectives are right now.
Kim, I have a question. So this policy, the new regulations, if there's a change of administration in November, will there be additional changes to Title IX? I know that's something in dispute. Do you know what's the word on the ground about potential additional changes to this policy?
So because they went through a process of rulemaking and established this as law, then it wouldn't automatically. There would be no opportunity to automatically get rid of these with a new administration. That would take some time, and I don't know, maybe Neera, you have some more insight on how much time that would take, but it isn't, historically there has been guidance. We were getting guidance from, there was Obama era guidance about Title IX. That could be easily eliminated with a new administration, but this is law. So it would take a whole process of rulemaking and creating new regulations. But the one, I think that, in terms of thinking about this as a holistic project, we imagine that if it comes to that, the way we've got it set up, we could easily, eliminate this one aspect of our procedures if these are eliminated. So we could still have the flexibility in our broader structure to dismantle these if we have that opportunity at some point in the future.
Great. Thank you, Kim, Neera, and Larry. And let me also add that, we all agreed, Kim, Neera and I agreed that as, heaven forbid, cases emerge, we hope they don't, but certainly they will, that we will revisit some of this, particularly the faculty hearing aspects. If we see problems that come up, that we'll reconvene and discuss some of those problems, some tricky things that we can't anticipate with regards to faculty due process in our hearing procedures. So thanks again to you all for doing this. And Larry, thanks again for Appendix N, and one day we'll be done with that appendix. The next item on our agenda, and the last item for today, is to hear from the faculty ombudsman. Dr. Laura Sabecki from the School of Medicine, and Professor Tom Metzlaff from the Law School. I'm sure you all by now, and I hope you all by now, are experts on Appendix N, to often mention Appendix N. Appendix N mentions that the faculty ombudsmen are to collect various data, including the number of contacts they have, the types of concerns they hear, and the units within the university from which concerns emanate. The handbook also calls on the ombudsman to present to the Academic Council an annual report of these data. And this is the purpose of this agenda item today. Now, I should say that what the ombudsmen are permitted to disclose and share publicly is governed by a code of conduct and professional ethics. So there's some limitations. In addition to the report that council will receive this afternoon, the ombudsman will present to the president and to ECAC a written report, a more detailed report. The president and ECAC will take this more detailed report and determine if there are patterns of persistent issues that require some attention, or if there's some policy changes that are needed to improve some areas. So I want to thank Laura and Tom for taking on this task and for being here today to present their report. And we'll start with Laura.
This is Laura Svetky. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Great, thanks. So I'm a professor in the School of Medicine, Department of Medicine. As Carrie just said, I'm the School of Medicine faculty ombudsperson. I've had the honor of being in this role since September 1st, 2019. And in preparation for taking on that role, I was trained by the International Ombudsman Association in the 4 core principles of being an ombudsperson: confidentiality, impartiality, independence, and informality. And there are ombuds definitions of those terms. If anybody wants to ask, I'm happy to talk about it. As I mentioned, I've been in this role for a little bit more than a year. I wanted to show you some of the data that have accrued over that year within the School of Medicine. So in that 13-month period, there have been 58 unique individuals who have requested time with the faculty ombuds with me. Those individuals came from 17 different departments, centers, or institutes. There's an average of 3.3 visitors per department or unit, with a range of 1 to 17. I'll say more about that in a moment. 43% of the visitors have been women, which is proportional to women on our faculty in the School of Medicine. 8.6% have been from underrepresented groups, and again, proportional to the faculty composition. Interesting to me was that a third of them were at junior faculty level, instructor or assistant professor level, and 2/3 were from mid or senior level faculty, including 15 full professors who sought consultation, although often they were seeking consultation about somebody that they were supervising. I've received a complaint from a couple of people who actually are not under my purview, and that I'm going to bring that up in a moment as well. This is the number of visits. There were a total of 111 visits, so an average of 2 per visitor. And again, the range was 1 to 25. 25 visits for a single visitor. That was quite an outlier, and visits include not just either face-to-face or Zoom encounters, but emails, phone calls, etc. The average duration of a visit was 86 minutes. I would say the vast majority were an hour. And over the 13 months that I've been doing this, there were an average of 5.8 visits per month. I looked at the last 6 months compared to the first 6 months that I was doing this to see if there was any indication that the pandemic was having an effect on use of the ombuds. And it was about double the rate per month during the period of April 1st to October 14th. Of course, that was after I'd been in the role for 6 months, and so maybe some of that is because people got to know me and knew that I was available. And then in addition to actually interacting with folks, I've consulted with other ombuds, and in particular Tom Metzloff, who you're going to hear from for a moment, and the International Association of Ombudspeople has a mentor program. So I have a mentor at another institution who I consult with on a monthly basis, and I've had various conversations with OIE. I want to highlight just some observations that might be considered trends or areas that warrant further attention. Two of the School of Medicine departments had more than 5% of their faculty seek a consultation with me. That seems very high to me, and maybe these departments need some special attention. Various people attempted to talk to me who were not School of Medicine faculty, and it turns out that there are important constituents in the School of Medicine who have no ombudsperson. It's unclear who the ombudsperson is for the School of Nursing. I don't think it's me. Maybe it's Tom. I think that needs to be clarified. And there is, in fact, no existing ombudsperson for residents, fellows, and staff in the School of Medicine. I will say that the fact that faculty from underrepresented racial and ethnic groups were not disproportionately represented in the stats I just showed you. We know anecdotally that this population is experiencing structural racism, microaggressions, and other concerns that may not bring them to an ombudsperson, and maybe there's a way to make the ombuds role more effective for that population. I would say there are similar concerns about women. They were not overrepresented in folks who came to talk to me, but clearly there are some concerns about structural gender bias and microaggressions. And along those lines, it was very common for somebody to come to me with an issue they were trying to deal with for themselves and saying, you know, I want to resolve this for myself, but more importantly, I want to resolve this for my department, my division, my unit, because I think this is a systemic problem. There's a climate issue. There's something structural here that needs to be addressed. And as an ombudsperson, I don't really have the tools or the authority to do that. And it was often unclear to me how to help that person find recourse in that situation. I think I'll stop there. There were other things that came up. For instance, conflicts between School of Medicine and non-School of Medicine faculty. There's some gaps in process, I think, in terms of how either I as an ombudsperson or the institution deals with conflicts like that. But let me stop and see if there are questions at this point.
Any questions for Dr. Savecki?
Hi, so I'm Ann West from the Department of Neurobiology in the School of Medicine. And actually I had two questions, which is, Laura, how do people generally find you? And I guess one of the things I wanted to say was, I actually served in a sort of informal role as ombudsperson for my department. And I know that other departments are doing this as well, because having local people who can sort of negotiate issues is useful, but I had no formal training. And also I have never actually known, I know that there's an ombudsperson, but I had not known it was exactly you within School of Medicine. So I guess that was my question. Are you interfacing at all with departments in some way?
There was an announcement. It's on various websites. It's on the OIE website, the School of Medicine website, et cetera. I would say, and it's been announced in the Faculty Affairs Steering Committee that Ann Brown chairs. And I would say that for the most part, people come to me because either somebody that they've talked to has heard that I was in this role. Sometimes that's their chair or their vice chair, so somebody in an authority position who heard about it because they were in an authority position, or sometimes it's word of mouth. I haven't honestly advertised. Been a little nervous to do that, but certainly if the Academic Council feels that that's warranted, I can do that. I will say something about the informal ombuds. You're not the only one who is doing that, and I think it's a really important function for people to know that there's somebody they can come and talk to informally, confidentially. I think it may be slightly problematic to use the word ombudsman because that has some legal implications, particularly related to confidentiality. There are things that you might be required to report that I, as an official ombuds, am not required to report. And so I would just explore that a little bit. I'm happy to help you do that.
Yeah, I was going to say, I know that other departments have done it well as well. And so if it was, I was going to just suggest that it might be something you want to advertise to the chairs of departments, that if they are doing this or thinking of doing it, that they form a network of these folks with you to solve issues like exactly the one you just mentioned. It is very useful to us, for instance, to be able to use that word in training grants or so this is the but you know but I don't know what the rules are, right? So this is the idea. I think if you could somehow form a network with that more informal group, you could probably help those. Maybe you don't want to advertise to everyone, but maybe you want to advertise down to those of us who are within the departments and could help us out a little bit.
Yeah, it's a great idea, and I'm happy to do that. The other thing is that this training that I received was awesome. I mean, it was really, really good. And I went there under, you know, President Price's auspices, but I don't know if there would be any prohibition to somebody else getting that training.
Can I say one word about that? Because we've had that come up on the university side. Political science had a program where they wanted to create some internal mechanism for dealing with some of the issues that an ombuds could deal with it. They were initially going to call them ombuds, and I think it's wrong to actually do that. Ombudsman is a formal phrase that's in the faculty handbook. It has connotations, it has legal implications for confidentiality. And I think the term that was decided on, and it's a good term, was liaison. So there are some departments that have faculty liaisons for dealing with some issues. And in fact, I've been talking recently with some other departments about creating these internal systems. But I think it's a mistake to call them ombuds. I think there should be something else. But I think they're excellent programs. There are a lot of things that you know, I will be talking with a faculty member about that would be probably better handled through some either department, different level system.
You know, Tom, this is Sally, the comment about liaison's good. I think if it were formally, you know, liaison to the ombuds office, and Laura and you also, Tom, had some kind of informal network, then things like the training grant usage that Anne referred to, it could still serve the same purpose without, you know, violating the legal definition.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Anne. I want to be careful that we don't create more work for these already overburdened ombuds. So we have to be, because it is a lot of work that we don't see. Laura, are you?
I'm good, thanks.
Okay, great. So Tom.
Sure, a lot of what Laura said is certainly matches kind of my observations. So the biggest change this year, of course, was the creation of the second ombuds position for School of Medicine, because as I was doing this position, it was significantly more work than I think anyone anticipated. And about half of my, I call them cases, they're not cases, I can't, my law school training gets there. You know, half of the situations did involve School of Medicine. And I certainly think there are sort of unique institutional infrastructure issues, governance issues on the School of Medicine side that warrant having a second ombuds with much greater expertise than mine in the School of Medicine. In terms of, it did have the impact in the year through July 1st, 2020 of reducing the amount of sort of situations I dealt with by about a third. It's still, I think, significant, roughly 50 matters that I dealt with. Some of those were continuations, but these are, you know, faculty, we call them visitors, so that we don't call them clients, or the 50 visitors. And I don't think I had anyone that I dealt with 25 times like Laura did, but maybe some that got close. So there was a tremendous range in terms of the amount of time depending on the problem. The problems range from really an amazing array of different situations, from compensation issues, financial issues, to promotion tenure matters that the faculty member is concerned with, to situations involving intra-faculty disputes, as well as disputes with chairs over a wide variety of items, and of course, issues of discrimination and harassment. My numbers are very similar to Laura's in terms of gender and underrepresented minorities, consistent with the percentage in the university. Close to half of my situations were women, very much matching their percentage in the population of faculty. It's hard to speak about, the impact that COVID had, but I think it has. The number of cases this summer has increased. My number of 50 was about 22 in the fall, and then a little higher number in the spring. But starting in the summer, which are I'm not counting these numbers, the number has increased. Some of that is there is a great deal of anxiety that faculty members are feeling that show up this way. Some of them financial questions. There were some financial issues that faculty had that they came to me to talk with, and I think usefully we were able to obtain some information and deal with that. It is very hard to speak about trends, and we do have an opportunity as ombuds to discuss trends. My own sense of that is so many of our situations are really one-offs. They are very individual disputes that faculty have or concerns that faculty have, either with their chair or other faculty members, sometimes with students, although I have seen very few student matters. It's very infrequent that I have faculty who are dealing with student issues. The one trend line that concerns me that I do want to bring up, and it will be in my report, Carrie, that I'll send to you, is what I think seems to be an increase in the number of suspensions or administrative leaves that faculty are being put on. When I first became ombudsman 3.5 years ago, I was informed and spoke with University Council and others about the possibility that faculty would be put on an administrative leave or suspended pending some investigation. And I was told that that would be a very limited situation where situations involved security issues, where a group of university officials would have made a careful determination that that was justified, what I think is a significant remedy. In the past year, maybe it's, again, these could be just one-off situations, the number of sort of administrative suspensions has increased. The impact on faculty who are, of course, suspended, not allowed to come to their office, not allowed to do their work on their research, as well as their teaching, is quite significant. It's perhaps made worse in a COVID era when the investigations that are then being conducted, sometimes by OIE, sometimes by HR, sometimes by other organizations, go slower than it probably normally does. But it concerns me, and it hits me that in some of these situations, at least from my vantage point, which is never, the first thing they teach you in Ombud school is there's always another side to the story, a situation. I already knew that from being a lawyer. But I did not see that the significant safety issue or risk to the institution that would justify this. I do think that the faculty needs to look hard and seriously about whether there needs to be some mechanism for assessing whether or not an administrative suspension of the faculty member is necessary and justified in the circumstances where it's being done. So that is probably the one trend issue that I've seen in the past year that gives me great pause. But thank you. It's certainly a pleasure to get to meet with so many Duke faculty. I'm always amazed at the breadth and the amazing talent that the university has. It is truly awesome to get to interact with so many incredibly talented people.
Thank you, Tom. Are there any questions for Tom? Sam Buell, Law School.
Hey, Tom. It's Sam Buell, your colleague from law.
Yeah.
Yeah. It would be possible to file a complaint with the Faculty Hearing Committee. I'm also the Faculty Hearing Committee chair, for those who don't know, to dispute as a due process violation, having been placed on on one of these statuses. Is that not right? And do you not raise that as a possibility for these folks?
Absolutely talk about that possibility. The question in some ways is timing. It's almost as if, you know, sorry for everybody else, I'm going to put this in sort of legal speak, which Sam will appreciate. You know, it's as if the university is kind of getting a temporary restraining order, but there's no mechanism for sort of, you know, how do you move for a preliminary injunction, because it stays in place for longer than you want a temporary restraining order to stay in place. You know, I don't know how quickly the faculty hearing committee could come to look at it. Right now, I'm not even sure what the standards are. You know, I mean, I had thought that the standards were, you know, a significant sort of safety interest to the university, which we appreciate. The faculty can be involved in situations like that. So I think that probably would be a logical sort of step if academic council and ECAC, you know, thought that this problem was serious enough to justify some measure, because you know, the damage that's done, you know, is very significant for the faculty involved in these situations. Now, it could be that at the end of the day, these investigations will prove something that would justify the kind of penalties that, you know, would make it not a big deal. But I think it's a serious question, and some sort of opportunity, you know, and due process, sometime, you know, within real time, within a week or two of in the middle of a suspension, or maybe even before a suspension is put in place in the first place, is something that I think should be seriously considered.
Thank you, Sam. Any other questions for Mr. Metzloff? Let me thank Tom and Laura again for their presentations. And what ECAC will do when we receive the report, the omnibus report to the President Price, ECAC will look at the report and we'll raise any issues that we see and patterns that we see with President Price and things that we think need attention, we will bring to his attention. Some of the faculty matters that Tom raised, we can take a look at with our own procedures, our own academic council procedures as they pertain to the faculty hearing committee on some of these. And in fact, we've already started a conversation with the provost on some of these matters of the hearing process and due process and when sanctions can take place. And then we'll continue those. Sally, anything you want to? Okay, Sally, see if you can.
Okay. The only thing I wanted to add actually was not, yes, we should continue those discussions, but also I wanted to mention, which has just been announced, just to make folks aware, because Tom alluded to not having that many student dealings, is we're expanding the student ombuds office as well. You know, it's used pretty heavily by undergrads. There's been, you know, some schools have their own sort of systems for this with their graduate or professional students, but there's going to be more capacity for ombuds function for the students, which they, you know, actively requested should it be required.
Thank you, Sally.
That's great.
Thank you both. And we'll report back to council if there are any patterns that we think you should be aware of. We'll certainly report back. Before we adjourn, I'd like to recognize President Price. As you all have noticed, I hope in your email today, President Price sent a statement to the community that's a follow-up statement to his Juneteenth statement on anti-racist policies and anti-systemic bias at Duke. President Price?
Well, thank you, Kerry, and I'll be very brief. Basically, I wanted to thank our faculty, as well as the leadership, Sally Tallman, Gene Washington in the health system, and our deans, because there has been substantial activity, as I hope was clear in my message, since I made my Juneteenth statement. And I would encourage all of you going forward to take a look at the website that we've constructed. It is a work in progress by design, because we do want to create a single portal for sharing information, resources that could be deployed at different parts of the university, and significant data as we gather them. So I believe that the faculty survey is still in the field. I encourage you to complete that survey if you have not already done so. We will be, as we customarily do, conducting student surveys, and we will be, for the first time, systematically surveying our staff with a launch of a survey in spring. So that website, and in general, the keeper of these data will be Kim's Office of Institutional Equity, but it is not an attempt to make Kim's office the keeper of programs. It is to create a kind of opportunity to curate information and to be more responsive to the community at the local level. So again, I just wanted to express my thanks, Carrie, to you for your leadership and the support of ECAC and others, but to all of our faculty who have in so many different ways stepped up. If you go to the resources page, for example, you'll see some wonderful videos that we have put together, programming that's been done for our faculty, for our alumni, by our faculty, for our students, by our students. I'm very inspired by the way that the community has been responding.
Thank you, President Price. And as I said to Vince when I saw the information, that I think Duke has now been propelled to the forefront of our peers in addressing these issues. It's an ambitious effort, an impressive effort, a very good start. And the faculty will be here to work with you, Vince, and the rest of the team to make some progress on these issues. So thank you for your leadership in this regard.
Thanks, and let me congratulate Sally and colleagues on the Duke Endowment Grant that was announced as part of this message that will support these efforts. I hope the first of many grants to support these efforts.
Thank you. Again, before we adjourn, let me also just remind you to let's take care of ourselves. Let's check in with our students when we get a chance and see how they're doing. They need it, they want it, so let's please make an effort to do that. And if there's no other business, hearing and seeing none, we're adjourned until November the 19th. See you then. Take care, everybody.